Welcome everyone. We'll wait a little bit here as attendees are coming online to get started. So we'll just give it another minute and be ready to go. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our latest series of the energy storage at PNNL seminar series. So as those of you that have been on this before, we're exploring some of the roles energy storage has and how that plays into the new grid storage launchpad that is coming to PNNL. And so today we're pleased to be joined by Rebecca O'Neill from PNNL talking about energy storage for social equity. And this is a newer start that was launched last year under the OE Office of Electricity Energy Storage Program. And it's really unique because when we start looking at large scale energy storage, traditionally we focused on the utility needs. And so this is really an opportunity to engage with communities, understand how do those use cases change when you're looking at it from a utility perspective. And so how does that feed into how we're developing new technologies? Does that community-based focus need to have higher safety levels? Do you need new longer lived technologies to work out? So it's an interesting facet that hasn't always been considered in our development cycle. So we're excited to have that input into what we're doing. So Rebecca, we'll turn it over to you here in a second, but Rebecca is an advisor at PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. I'll spell that out once. She joined the lab in 2015 from the Oregon Department of Energy, where she represented the agency on water power development, oversaw the state renewable portfolio standard, and ran a multi-million-dollar portfolio of federal grants. In her career at the laboratory, she served as the relationship manager for the U.S. DOE Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Portfolio, served a rotation in the U.S. Department of Energy's Water Power Technologies Office, and has led the regulatory area for the energy storage program. Research interests include energy justice, energy storage, community scale innovation, sustainable hydropower, and marine energy development. Rebecca serves on multiple organizational boards and advisory groups related to renewable energy, is a civilian advisory graduate of the National Security Seminar at U.S. Army War College, and holds a BA from Rice University in Houston. So Rebecca, thank you for joining us today. We're looking forward to your talk. A couple more things I'll put in before we let you start. Please put your questions in the comment section, and we will, at the end, we'll hold those to the end, and we'll have 15 to 20 minutes at the end to answer those questions. And then also there will be recordings available of the presentation that will be posted and that you can look at, but we are not sending out slides of the presentations at this time. So just the recording. So we'll talk to you later. And Rebecca, with that, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vince, for that welcome. One of the reasons why energy justice is, I'm so thrilled about that introduction is because I get to say that my research interest is in energy justice at a national laboratory. I'm just so glad that this has become such a seminal issue for us, and as we plan the future grid, that we have an opportunity to make it a really deliberate area of research. And as Vince pointed out, that research isn't just limited to social information. It's thinking thoroughly about the opportunity to design and deploy technologies for people. I want to start by acknowledging, as As Vince just did, he acknowledged Dr. Imre Juk, who saw this vision early, has been stewarding social equity projects for a while. But the real excitement here is that we're kind of trying to build it in a very deliberate program. And so where I want to start our conversation today about this program is to share a little bit more about how the ideas come to life. And pictured here, of course, are some of our communities that we're working with. We asked them to send us pictures of how they felt about their work together. And we got, as you can see, a whole range of ideas about how to represent what they're interested in and how they work together. So for our talk today, I'm going to just back up for 1 second and say, what is different about thinking about a more equitable grid, not just a more resilient grid or a more reliable grid or a more cost-effective grid, but how an equitable grid is something a little bit different. The role of energy storage in enabling a more equitable grid, some of the kind of structural and conceptual thinking that really led to how we've built this energy storage for social equity initiative. I also want to make sure I don't miss the vision with this talk, because there's a lot about the way that the initiative is done that's intended to elevate the practice of technical assistance with communities, which is, I would say it's different than working with typical business environments. And there's a lot of strategies that are going to be more effective in working with communities for durability and for sustainability and to meet those needs. So I want to talk a little bit about that as design, but I also want to talk about how we're hoping through the technical assistance projects and ultimately through the development of these projects with these 14 communities, we're changing larger practices so that we're getting more than just those 14 communities will get benefits from this program at the end of the day. So this is the agenda I'll try to take you through. So I want to start back here about, I want to give you some more ideas about what we mean by a more equitable grid. So there's a lot about the way that we plan and invest in technologies to advance the grid that is really looking at its performance, right? How is it, how much can we anticipate that performance? How acceptable are our market conditions for getting us really efficient outcomes? And what I'm inviting you to do here is look at these kinds of ways of measuring equity as a part of grid performance and as a part of rate making and work that is done to oversee these investments and the planning processes. So what we're proposing to think about is, what are some more strategies that we can look at the grid we have, assess how well it's doing in recognizing who's out there, whether the people receiving the energy may be in different positions about the quality of that energy or the ability to handle it if the energy is not there or is not something they can afford. We care a lot about this middle one, the investment decision making. So to what degree, not just do the technologies themselves, are they environmental in the siting process and so forth, but what about upstream of that when we're thinking about where we put them, what kinds of technologies are appropriate? And this is where storage really helps us think about that in a really flexible way. I'll talk about that in a second. And then the program impact assessment, recognizing who is benefiting from it. So not just kind of abstractly the operator of the grid or the customers of the grid, but specifically who is gaining wealth opportunities or has opportunities to administer or make changes in that process, right? So these are the kinds of things we're thinking about when we think about a more equitable grid. And the reason I want to put this up here is just that this is something that is an emerging practice across the country. A lot of states that we're working with and utilities that we're working with are trying to understand how they're supposed to not just make deal with the tension of the reliable and cost-effective grid, which actually is a trade-off itself, but how they're supposed to build in all of these other future objectives of the grid. And we argue that equity is an objective of the grid. We should be trying to make the grid function differently in the future in a way that accommodates the needs that everyone has of energy as a service. So a lot of this work is coming out now. I'm just putting this in here as an example to show you that there's so much happening across the country that is thinking about it from a larger grid perspective. How are we going to transform our grid to meet our clean energy goals? But right now, that's still very much limited to thinking about decarbonization as a human-focused goal, or environmental justice, about making choices for whether or not a technology has fewer or greater environmental impacts, direct environmental impacts. And so what we wanted to do is share this context with you as a way to say, this is some of the inspiration for us to do the energy storage projects, because there's a lot about that technology that lets you think a little bit more flexibly about, well, if I were to actually operate the grid differently, or if I were going to invest in the grid differently, how can something like storage might be a proxy you could imagine for any kind of improvement in the grid anywhere. And so it really helped us kind of unlock some thinking in working with all of these partners about how it doesn't have to just be about a lower carbon solution. It can be about recognizing communities that are on the front lines of climate and what tools do they need to be more prepared for climate. It can be about recognizing just power quality in the distribution system. All kinds of things start to become possible. So this is an emerging practice. We're going to be putting out a lot more material about this shortly. But I want to give credit to the New Jersey BPU, because they were the ones that really inspired us to think about this for energy storage. They said, well, we have a mandate for 500 megawatts, I think it is, that they need to construct. And they said, where can we put it, or how can we design that program so that we get more benefits for people, so that more people in New Jersey get to see it, as opposed to it just occurring somewhere, and they feel like it's connecting to more than just their needs as a ratepayer. How do we make sure that we're demonstrating that value? And so that really made us take a step back and say, all right, well, how does energy storage fit into a more just system? And so we used the energy justice tenets. These are the traditional tenets of thinking about energy justice: distributive, recognition, procedural, restorative. And those four are the ones that we've mostly organized our thinking around. If you're not familiar with this, there's a lot of literature out there that explains it. I culled a lot of it from the rest of these slides for your benefit. But procedural is the one that you might hear the most about. Who has access to the process, right? Who makes the decisions? How transparent are the decisions? How kind of even technically available are the decisions, right? Does it take 5 years to make a decision? That might be tricky for a lot of people to really meaningfully participate in. We're really interested in that, but we're also very interested with storage and thinking about distributive justice and the allocation of benefits and burdens. And so the reason that's really powerful in this case with storage, as you start to imagine, is that the allocation of benefits isn't just money. The allocation of benefits is how available energy is to you, how much it costs, yeah, but there might be ways in which other kinds of indirect effects are making you, a reliance on energy for your medical equipment comes up a lot, because there are utility programs that try to address that. But there are other ways in which people can have the quality of the grid, the availability of the grid affects other features of energy justice. And this is where you start to get to that central piece. Energy burden is a representation of how much of your income has to be spent on energy. But there's been an interesting study, for example, that shows that in very hot climates, there are people that are constrained by what they can pay for energy, just don't even turn on their air conditioning units until 5 to 10 degrees hotter than what most people would. And they just endure the difference. And so we think about this as additional levels of vulnerability in the system. If it's too expensive, you don't use it as much, and then you suffer other kinds of secondary consequences. And we start to think about vulnerability as, if your home is not well insulated, and on and on and on, right? So you start to see all these additional dimensions of energy inequities. And to the right, now we started to think, well, what is it that storage can do to alleviate some of those inequities, or at least turn back the other way? A lot of times when we talk about energy justice, we're talking about reducing harm. And we thought, no, energy storage actually lets us imagine making something work better. So not just reducing a harm in the traditional sense, reducing the severity of a harm. It really let us say, what would it mean to reverse the trends completely and try to drive towards a better outcome, a more equitable grid, as I keep saying. So let's walk through and talk about some really specific examples of this. When we designed the energy storage for social equity program, this initiative, we thought, if we say, hey, who needs storage to a bunch of communities, they wouldn't know what we were talking about. They wouldn't know why storage was a good idea. They wouldn't understand. That's asking a lot of communities to think of all the ways that storage can support their interests. And so what we asked them is, do you have an environmental impact challenge with the energy system? Do you have a concern about the resilience of your system? Do you have a problem with access? And we focused most of our conversation with communities on the right side here. So when we launched this program in September 2021, we put out an opportunity for communities to see if they were interested in some additional technical assistance from the lab, in this case, PNNL, that would enable them to potentially qualify for funding from Sandia National Laboratories to develop the project. And we thought, okay, we have to make this something where people will understand what the opportunity space is for them. How do they see a community outcome? Because we're gonna, at the end of the day, we're really gonna need them to be bought into that outcome, right? If it isn't closely connected to a problem they experience. So when we launched it in September and we made this available, and I'll share a little more of exactly what we made available, we were all blown away by how many people saw themselves in this program. We had maybe 5 times more applicants than we could support. And we even made more, I think we made even more selections than we originally intended because there were so many exceptional candidates. So, so where you might have joined this webinar thinking, I have no idea what the connection between energy storage and energy equity were, we figured out that if you turn it into solving a challenge in the energy system that connects with what people really care about and connects with their problems, that these links really do occur. And they're even teaching us now about all of the ways that it can occur. So learning through doing. So what is this program? So we announced it in September and we closed it in December. As I mentioned, we had over 60 applications. We ultimately selected 14. So my math might have been a little short there. So it made between 4 to 5 times more applicants than we selected. And the concept here is to develop the technical work that's going to help rural, tribal, and urban communities that face a challenge that would qualify them for sort of what I think the term right now is disadvantaged communities, but we try not to use that. We try to say, we try to shift the conversation more to, you know, what are your acute challenges and how might we actually do something to address your acute challenges and tell us why you're deserving of sort of extra attention and government support. And most communities can articulate that quite clearly. We don't need to make a perfect definition for it. But the goal was to develop this technical assistance with helping communities just articulate the connection between a challenge that they're experiencing in the energy system and what a responsive technical solution might look like, and to do some scoping of that technical solution to the point where it would be possible to develop a project. And at that point, in this Energy Storage for Social Equity program, our colleagues at Sandia National Laboratory have a handshake with us to move some of those projects into a development phase, more along the traditional lines of the energy storage program's project development work. So what we are particularly excited about here is that we sort of did an open call around the topic. We developed a really clear sensibility about what we were going to do to get them to a certain point. And then now these communities later this year will have an opportunity to consider direct development, possibly with DOE support, or if we can help them get support from other places, we absolutely are going to try to do that as well. Within this general structure, I just want to point out there are a few things that we did here in this technical assistance program that we abstracted out because we think these are really valuable ways of thinking about technical assistance. When you're starting to work with communities who we think of as vulnerable communities or communities with acute challenges. So the first one, and we've been talking a lot with other folks at the Department of Energy about this because it's not so easy to do in the federal government, which is make it really easy for people to find you and talk to you and apply. So we did have a phone number so that somebody could call and a woman named Savannah would pick up the phone and answer any questions folks had. We would talk to them a little bit more about their problems before they actually had to put in any kind of application. The application was a web form. It was not really detailed volumes. We asked them to, where possible, just identify which kinds of disadvantages or challenges or vulnerabilities they felt they faced and why they thought, just give us a little more information about that and why they thought that this program was a good fit for them. So at the end of the day, we had applications in hand that were not too onerous, and it made it easier for us as reviewers, of course, but I think it made it a lot easier for people to access and feel connected to the programs. We also did do some targeted outreach. We took a look back and thought it's really hard for us in emails to reach some of these communities that haven't traditionally been connected to us. So we took some mapping work around what we understood about energy vulnerability, what we understood about sort of certain community situations, and walked down those lanes a little further to try to do more outreach to those communities. And I see that coming from the Department of Energy more broadly now, a lot more willingness to say, we can't just publish information and hope for the best. We really do have to make sure we try our best to reach the communities that would otherwise not be, have not been yet connected to us in innovation. The eligibility is linked to the need. We really felt strongly that we needed to select communities that would not have an opportunity to do this otherwise, or sort of had more systemic and contextual reasons that it would be challenging to deliver a project. As I mentioned before, we focused a lot on the problem, not a technology solution exclusively. We didn't say, who needs energy storage, as much as we said, do you have these kinds of challenges? Here's how we think energy storage can help you with those challenges. And it's a lot easier to talk about the kinds of problems people are experiencing than it is to skip that step and focus on a solution. On the right side of the slide, these things are actually really, really important for the vision that we're trying to achieve here. So the workforce and equity, for every one of these projects, we have an approach to understanding what the conditions are that we've been talking about, these vulnerabilities, on a more analytical basis, working with some of our economists and social scientists to take readily available data, match it up with what the community knows, we wouldn't know it without them, and do some more, a richer understanding of the relationship between making this investment and making a change in that outcome. And one of the reasons for that is, not only do we feel like that's a really important value statement for helping them speak to what they're trying to achieve and why a clean energy solution or a storage solution is going to help them, you can really put a finger on it instead of sort of speaking to it broadly. But also, if you do it 14 times, you get a lot smarter about what are all of the connections associated with an investment and an equity outcome. And we want those connections to start to be made more naturally. We want them to feed up into how investments are made, how financing works, how markets work for storage more broadly, so that more people can see these connections for themselves because they have the case studies and they have the data and they have the studies that say, no, these kinds of benefits can accrue if you do it like this. And we think that that has enormous potential to change the game for how we develop storage in the future, as Vince mentioned. The community of communities, this is a big piece of capacity building. So obviously, as a national laboratory, we're pretty far away from the day-to-day life of a lot of the communities we're talking about here. And so for us to be successful, the communities need to see each other and they need to connect to one another, and they need to be able to share their stories laterally in their own networks. So for us, we started to create space for the communities to talk to one another. They actually developed some of their own offline forums. And our folks in New Orleans and a tribal organization in Oregon have been cooperating on certain aspects of their work. They see so many connections. So not only do we need to create more opportunities for the communities to talk to one another, but they will see all kinds of connections between their issues that are really difficult for us to see on the outside and assume. So this has been really a challenge for all of us in this space to not to make assumptions about how communities can find their own partnerships and how rich some of those unique connections can really be. And then the last one is the connection to future project funding. And we got this feedback very strongly from some of our external reviewers in this program, which is there's a lot of technical assistance and plans and studies that get done, but they don't always go somewhere. And so it is really important to remember, how are we going to not just do the study? The study's not the point, right? All of these other things are the point. And so in this program, thanks to Dr. Juk and the energy storage program, we built it to do both. And we're going to hold ourselves accountable that it's not just the energy storage program, of course, that's going to support it. So we're doing some financing development and tutelage and workshops and reaching out to certain sectors to try to build more connections and more opportunities. But this is really important to us to help them actually make it through that stage as well. So this is walking you back through the project, and then I'll get to the communities because I struggle to stop, so I have to hold myself to a good stopping point if I don't do it at the end. So this goes back to like, how do we actually choose this? There's a lot of need out there. How do we handle 60 applications? So a lot of the folks that reached out to us had needs that we didn't feel confident that energy storage could be a solution. That in that case, we tried to offer them something else. I'll mention that in a second. In some cases, they had challenges that were well beyond the energy system, and that felt very true to us too. So trying to find other alternatives for those communities to use other programs or connect with state energy offices or get more experience or connected to local organizations became a higher priority. So for the ones that we chose, we felt very confident that storage had a clear connection to what they were doing. We felt really confident that the applicant themselves was the disadvantaged community. It's a little bit tricky because we really needed to see a tight connection, because once you start to create a structure, a partnership, that means that those partnerships really endure. And so we really need to see a lot of community expertise and leadership in the project. We also wanted them to have a willingness to work with us, because a lot of the work that we're doing, you could call it co-production of knowledge. There's a lot of the work that we're doing. They really need to tell us what they're trying to achieve. They do need to tell us and give us guidance on the data. We're not asking for a lot of detailed information. We're doing our best to get that on our own, but we still have to have them there with us through that process. And then the last one, of course, is this credibility question. This was the way that we handled, there's just a universe of people that can advance energy storage projects. And so it was important to us that the people that were coming together with the technical assistance project, that there wasn't a question of lack of trust with the actual community. So the technical assistance, what is it, right? What we did is we organized it into a few different bins of activities. So we said, all right, it's going to be really clear that if they're talking about a project, or they're talking about solutions stemming from problems, that we're going to need to do some basic grid analysis to understand their condition and understand the loads in the buildings or whatever it is that we're working with. So we knew we were going to need to use some of our technical expertise there, and created a team that does that for all of the technical assistance recipients. We created another team that's really focused on the economics and financing conditions that are associated with the project. How do you think about a more or less advantageous structure for revenue or for ownership structures and on so forth in wealth building? We created another one that's really about kind of capacity building. So this is workshops, this is help with identifying grants. And then of course, this last piece that I mentioned before around equity and workforce analysis, we have a team that's entirely devoted to doing that for all 14. For the other sets, for us, we knew we needed to be prepared to catch those big bins of work. But once we selected our applicants, we also knew that we were going to have to sit down and scope it with them. And with communities, that actually takes a little bit of time. It takes time to iterate on understanding what the problems really are and what the work should be in order to get there. But it was a way for us to create sort of a mutual understanding of what we're trying to do in this technical assistance project. And currently all of those are done, which is just outstanding. So as I mentioned, we had to do this with those technical assistance participants. These are the kind of bins that we had. Some folks had a more developed concept, I would say. And so for some of that, we brought a different group of people in who are more at the interconnection phase or are more on the safety side, or people who are really thinking about kind of that last stage once you've identified a project. So we called that the project concept QC. But I just want to acknowledge that for the ones that we didn't select, we did offer additional support. So it wasn't a program where you applied and then you didn't find out what happened afterwards. It just was a no. We reached out to all of them and said, are any of these smaller level activities that we could sort of provide for you without much effort? Are those useful to you? So I mentioned before, like connecting to the state energy office, which was the suggestion of one of our advisory committee members, or just looking around for other grant opportunities or technical assistance opportunities. Or do they just kind of need an energy storage 101 experience? They just want to understand a little more about the technology, and maybe they'd be a better candidate the next time around. We also were very pleased to have several utilities apply to the Energy Storage for Social Equity program. And so since that time, we thought that's what's exciting about that, of course, and this goes back to the beginning point, is that everybody's trying to figure out how to do this better. And so there's just been this program has really opened up a lot of channels for people to envision how they can implement a program or change the way that they do their business to achieve a more equitable grid. So who did we select? I know this is the big slide. We selected 14 folks from all over the country. Some are urban. You'll see those notched with the U. Some are tribal. Those are the ones that we have with the T or affiliated with an indigenous community. And the others are the rural ones, the ones that are located in maybe, I mean, we think of it as, it's rural is not just not urban, but we thought of it as kind of a unique condition in some cases. So for example, the R, Coast Electric Power Association of Mississippi, their main concern is around maintaining reliable energy supply to their water systems because of that critical interdependence between their water systems and their electricity systems. They actually have more in common than you might imagine with the Makah tribe, which is up in the Olympic Peninsula in Nia Bay, Washington, who is also concerned about the reliability of electricity supply for their freshwater supplies. So there's all kinds of connections here among these folks that we were, through the scoping exercise, we've been able to see and are really excited to kind of try to make sure we share out more broadly so that more communities that have that problem of interdependence can see more clearly the relationship between storage and that problem. So let me go through some of these participants for you in a little bit more detail. This is the list here again, if we need to look through it. Sometimes it's hard to squint at the screen otherwise. But the applicant, the organization listed, and the location. And of course, for some of these, the United Nations is the United Nations, that is the location. So, so we tried to kind of bring them together and group them a little bit on some initial basis. And we decided not to do that by their, what kind of community they were, but more around the issues, because that's been one of the richest areas of work. So like I mentioned, the freshwater independency is one. For others, it's supplying power to a health facility or other kinds of facilities where they feel this critical need to make sure that the energy supply remains operational. And then you have folks like Rogue Climate who suffer greatly. This is the community of Talent, Oregon, and are rebuilding their community after wildfires in 2020, where they suffered devastating destruction of property and space as a community. So we tried to do this initially, and that's how we organized it. But I think we all agree now that we feel like those haven't really been as meaningful of connections as some of the other connections that happened. So who are these people? A little bit more detail about them. Jewel Community Power. This is Rochester, New York. I'm just going to give you a quick run through on some of these, but I know the recording will be available. But this, for them, they supply emergency housing so they're helping really acute conditions for certain populations. And they wanted to make sure that their facilities had more opportunity to reduce their power bills, operate at a lower cost and be able to supply more benefits to people. They also had some really great ideas about resilience. So we were excited to work with them. The Makah tribe up in the Northwest, I think the pictures that people chose to take and send to us just told us a lot. And all of this is on our website. And I know that Shannon or Lara can put that link in the website, all the details about these communities that we asked them to just articulate what it was they were looking for through working with us in this program. And the Makah tribe chose to send us a picture of their natural environment, which is pretty stunning if you find yourself there. As I mentioned, Rogue Climate in Talent, Oregon, which was kind of famous around the world for the devastation that they suffered from the wildfires in 2020. And so this has been really exciting too, because a lot of how they're envisioning their energy future is deeply connected to how they're envisioning their community future. Together, New Orleans has a really brilliant idea around community lighthouses, what they call it. If you look at their website, they even have some videos. They have a great idea. And what's so two things that we were excited about with these guys especially is that so much of what it would take to do this, they're already, we have a lot of thoughts about how we can maybe build resilience hubs, and those would be helpful to people. And, if it's very hot or very cold. But their vision is a little bit different. They're saying, no, we need these lighthouses, these spaces to be kind of community chosen, because we know which places we go to for help. And we also want them to be, there to be enough of them so that everybody can access one without a lot of work. And so they have a vision for kind of mapping out sites all over the city in order to help people kind of more naturally find solutions in one place. And this idea is a powerful one, and I think that they've got a lot of partnerships working together to build it. So really exciting group of people to work with. Warm Springs Community Action Team in energy storage for social equity has a lot of, they're taking advantage of some really exciting small business concepts. They're taking advantage of some of their richer tribal, interests around their tribal members and their direction. And they're also working with some state programs that are trying to do more with community solar and support other aspects of the facility there. And this is, as I mentioned before, these two organizations started to connect around this, even though on their face they look like they might be very different kinds of communities, but their strategies are really materially similar. So really exciting to see these kinds of connections being made. Aiko Solutions is interested in supporting Savannah and Atlanta. Their concepts are similar in that they are really interested in the questions around, where in these urban environments there are specific vulnerabilities and how do we address that. But I have to tell you, this organization has been outstanding just because they see the really deep context behind some of these opportunities. So they're very interested, as it says here in that last piece, on wealth building and finding more ways for people to understand these technologies for themselves and improve their wealth and generational level, which has just been thrilling. So I won't keep going through all of these in too much detail, but as you can see, a lot of folks are thinking about microgrids, and for our tribal technical assistance recipients, a lot of them are interested in independence and energy sovereignty. So this comes up a lot with some of them. As I mentioned, Coast Electric Power, it's our only utility that we selected to be here, but they're very interested in this nexus of storage and solar with wastewater treatment plants to make sure all of these things come together, and it's building on a plan that they created in their community. Honor the Earth, of course, I love that picture as well. Has a lot of different strategies. I think they have a lot of opportunities to work on different things. So we're actually kind of evaluating different scenarios for them to address some of their situations. Coyote Steals Fire. That's some of our favorite name for a community organization. But also had some great experience developing solar already, and so now they're kind of trying to take it to the next level of really thinking comprehensively about it for the Umatillas. And then Oahu, and Molokai has also some very interesting visions for there's this relatively small island, and they are excited about energy sovereignty, and they're excited about doing more to self-supply and have their own wealth building around technologies that they endorse as a community. So there's a lot of acute issues in Oahu on Molokai, and as it says at the bottom there's some real vulnerabilities to the supply chain for alternative technologies as well. Klickitat Valley Health Hospital, Native Renewables, very well known to a lot of us working in here, who are maybe one of the more sophisticated organizations when it comes to energy solutions in the Hopi and Navajo nations. And a lot of the folks that they serve are off-grid. So there's a lot of really incredible questions that they're trying to wrestle with, which is, what does it mean to bring folks on the grid, or what is the right set of solutions for some of the tribal members? And the United Nation here, of course, is also has a lot of opportunities, but has a dimension of this health center that they're really interested in thinking about making sure that their health services are available, given the kinds of conditions that drive energy, lack of reliability in the energy system. So I'm there just about, but I really do want to leave you with what is this, where are we at with this project, and what is our really big goal? And I'm also making a shameless plug for a Together New Orleans event coming up in June that they're excited to host, to really start to bring some of these ideas up more broadly. So we finished our scopes of work. We're currently doing the technical assistance work, and we are going to be doing that work over the next several months. So if we have an opportunity to talk again next year, I hope to be telling you all about the status of these different projects in practice. But as we're doing that work, what we're really trying to do, as I mentioned before, are some of these big things. And if you have ideas or questions about how we can do these big things, I would love to work together with you, because I think there's a lot of roles for all of us in making these bigger things happen. So the first thing I mentioned is that doing the equity and the workforce analysis for all of our communities is really important, because it helps not only the communities articulate what is going on with them and why it needs to be maybe a little different, but also it tells the story of how investments in improving the energy system materially support their well-being, especially for vulnerable communities. That is so powerful, and it's really hard to do without the communities in the middle of that conversation. You can't do it just by looking at census data, as I mentioned. So there's a lot of new work that's trying to be done to really articulate why an investment in energy storage or basically an adjustment in the performance of the energy system has a social outcome and can have a positive social outcome. The second piece is the financing tool. So not just demonstrating the connection in a quantitative way or an analytical way that lets you use it more broadly, but it's actually conditioning the market to look for it and to reward it. And so that sometimes that means the way that financing it can be structured. There are a lot of models out there already about community financing models and community banking. But doing more to draw the connection deliberately here so that these things start to turn on their own merit, on their own momentum. We want to build capacity in all of these communities. So it isn't just to give them a document. We're doing everything from story maps and visualizations and other ways that we're trying to give them tools so that they can tell their own story over time. And it's not just linked to us here at the laboratory. And then the last one here is this larger idea around resilience. And I know it's a word with a lot of meanings to a lot of folks. But for us, what this story of energy storage for social equity initiative actually partly tells you is that understanding resilience isn't just understanding it at the macro, at the bulk grid level. It's actually something you have to understand by understanding the consequences to people. And so we've been doing a lot of work trying to articulate how you can start to plan for resilience in a way that captures the most vulnerable and the greatest consequences of a lack of resilience. So this, one of our goals here is to kind of create that pathway. A lot of this work with communities is working with utilities too. I mean, that's a big piece of it, is helping them meet the utilities so that they can make the decision and work together. So part of it too is also that partnership of explaining how communities can articulate their issues in a way that there can be a response from the energy system in either an investment or just a different strategy, operational strategy. So I'll leave you there. I really appreciate your attention. Thank you all so much. And I look forward to working with you all in this area in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. So we've gotten a few questions in. I want to encourage everyone. We still have some time left here to input your questions. But one of the ones that's come up, Rebecca, is in this TA, we're trying to look for energy storage applications. And there's maybe some cases where energy storage doesn't work or is not the solution.
That's right.
What are the other avenues? Where would they get directed towards? What are the other opportunities if that falls out of the scope?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot. Because of course, right? I mean, energy storage is not a cure-all for every ill in society, right? So as I mentioned, some of the applicants, we said, wow, we're so happy you applied. Let's work together in a different zone, right? Like it's not this zone, but let's work together over here on a different issue. So like the utilities, for example, what we ended up doing are building tools or helping them with software or something like that, because that's really more the nature of the need. For others, we reached out, everybody we weren't able to supply with a technical assistance support. We reached out and we asked them, do you want our help? Do you want our help identifying technical assistance to actually get you what you might want? Do you want our help with education? Do you want our help with anything else? Because even if they're not right for us, we really didn't, we feel like once they've walked in our door, they're a part of our customer, we're providing customer service at this point. So even if we don't have the right tool for them, we want to enable them to go find the right tool or do our best in the DOE ecosystem to try to find that. So I will say that we did coordinate closely with other technical assistance programs at the Department of Energy, like Communities Leap, to try to see how we can match up techniques and strategies. And we are getting all of our communities together. And I think if we keep doing that well, I think those communities will come back through and they will have other opportunities, because we'll keep demonstrating that community technical assistance is really important for our larger energy futures. So I wish I could tell you that there's a renewable power for a social equity initiative, but here we are. And fortunately, energy storage does have a very wide application space. So I think it worked out all right.
Thank you. So when we look at specifically the energy storage systems out there, do you see any kind of minimum size constraints, or technologies or anything like that that are building? Or you kind of, is it a pure kind of open-ended, what type of storage system could work?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, that storage can be developed at very, very small scales, right? And we didn't feel like if someone was proposing it to be something that was very, very small, we didn't feel like government technical assistance was maybe the right solution. But if they were able to show us that a network of small storage solutions were providing a larger community benefit, and they were able to create a really convincing argument, we didn't pay too much attention to what the technology size was. We were really interested in whether we're going to be able to solve a problem. And that was the main limiter about storage, whether the storage connection was strong, wasn't the scale. It was the clarity of that the storage solution would be solving a problem, meaningfully solving a problem.
Let me look through here. We're getting a lot of questions. Thank you, everyone,
great.
coming through. So back on the energy storage, it says, how will you evaluate how well the energy storage fulfilled the need of each project? And so is there a plan to install monitoring, instrumentation, collect data? I know this may be on the deployment side with Sandia a little bit, but
that's a great point, and I'm going to take that note. I did, so what we're doing, you're right, is the conceptual piece. We're doing the planning piece. We're saying, here's the baseline issue. Here's what we think a storage strategy that is actively trying to address that, as opposed to sizing and citing for a specific revenue capture opportunity. If you're citing and sizing it to solve a social problem, how would you do that? And what's the delta? But I didn't think about that piece, which is the M&V, right? It's like, go back and check, and did it. But that's absolutely important. Thank you for raising that. We will. It's like a year and a half away, but I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, that's probably a question for the Sandia team.
Thank you. So another question we had is, we're focused on storage in here, but as we're looking at other DERs that could be deployed, is that part of the technical analysis in there, looking at that? And is it kind of the same metrics that we would be looking at in terms of
yes,
what the benefits are of those systems?
Yes, absolutely. So let's say this right. It's really common for a lot of these communities to be thinking about storage and solar. I have to just say that solar, that is very available. There are vendors everywhere that can give you a quote and a concept for a solar situation, right? So we sort of think that what we're trying to do with solar and storage is the fact of the solar being a part of the scope isn't really, I guess it's not difficult, is what I would say. There's also so many ample funding opportunities for solar. It's not something, it may not be something that the energy storage program chooses to prioritize when it goes to help with funding. That's something where the communities would have to find an alternative, but we didn't fail to include it. And a lot of these things, there's like a building efficiency element or something else in the mix too, just because that's practical. I mean, that's appropriate. But the dominant thing that's hard and not readily available for a lot of these folks is understanding how a storage system really smells and how big it is and what that means to put that in their communities. So that's where we really feel like the national labs are providing a lot more value. So that's why it's most of the real work of the technical assistance is in the storage piece.
Okay. So we've got one question here about, and you talked how we did have utility participants in here, yes. But and these energy storage systems will be part of a larger energy system.
Right.
And so what are those connections? And how do you bring in industry that may be looking at it and how that could benefit? How do you bring in utilities and help make those connections for a community? Any thoughts you can provide on that? How you see those connections working out?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is a lot of utilities are trying to do this. They just they just don't know how to start to build social information into how they do. They do a lot of work with, you know, an emergency response or a municipal government, for example, and there's so much coordination, you know, in an outage that happens. But to plan and invest in the grid, especially, you know, think about a distribution system planning paradigm, right, which is relatively still developing for a lot of folks. But most utilities don't have a richness of detail about the performance of the distribution system, but now they start to have to because of the development of DERs and two-way flows and everything else that's adding all this complexity to their system. And so as they're doing this, all of a sudden now they have an opportunity to think about storage, and they have an opportunity to think about, well, how reliable is this feeder and who lives on the other side of that feeder? And they're asking us these kinds of questions. How do we start to take, you know, you've made a connection, a conceptual connection between storage and an equitable outcome or a better social outcome. What do I do with that information as part of my planning and operations? And so that's where we start to work on the utility side of the equation to say, all right, well, we've started to build a bench of analysis that shows you how this specific type of investment gets you a benefit. And so you can roll that information up into your planning to start to make some assumptions, at least rough order assumptions about certain types of investments giving you certain types of outcomes. But it also does the other thing, and I mentioned that at the end too, which is helps them conceive of a pathway for engaging the community to design resilience for them. Part of it is hard, right? Communities are not one thing, they're not all the same. And even within a given community, people disagree. And so it's a lot of hard work. But the idea is if you start to say, okay, well, my resilience goals are more around protecting this community, or it's more around, I can't have the same outage restoration strategy. I turn on, you know, the central business district first, and then I turn on the feeders with the most customers, but maybe I need to be turning on the folks that really can't handle it if their power is out first, right? And you just start to see all of these different strategies, and then they have to do that investigation themselves. So we're there with the utility saying, here's some information you can use in planning and investment. Here are some ways that you can engage with your communities really meaningfully to think about resilience for them. Here's how you bring that into your regulatory commission or your board review if you're a muni or a co-op, and you start to build a practice. And so that's a lot of it too, sharing the best practices, keep reaching out to people and keep operating these opportunities so they don't feel impossible and a slippery slope. So deep and rich connections between how utility business models can work and this outcome, yes.
That's great. I'll ask you one other question specific to the projects we're selected. Then we've got a few coming in on, you know, future opportunities or future look ahead. But so any of the communities working on or have vehicle to grid as part of what they're looking at? Did you see that a lot in those, or is that still out there a ways?
It is in there. I don't think it's anybody's big issue. And the storage I have to say the energy storage program at OE historically hasn't been as focused on those technology solutions, but there are some legitimate education about those solutions that is not hard to provide in the short term. I'm not sure. I think there's one instance in which we're looking at it where it really makes sense as part of the community, like the microgrid strategy that they have. But I'm not sure that was ever really a dominant one for these folks. And I'm not sure we would have selected it if it was the dominant one, just because of the nature of the follow-on funding.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a great question. We should look into that some more.
But a lot of things to look at.
It's true.
So we had one question on, you know, someone new looking at this and trying to get into more of this, you know, the community focused energy justice. Are there any guidelines or things that you've seen come out, you know, or kind of lessons learned that we can already start kind of giving out to people on, you know, what we've learned so far? I don't know if there's anything on your website that you've got for that or not, or reference materials for them.
Yeah. So like, here's an example really shortly. Richard Baxter, who's a well-established expert in energy storage financing with Mustang Prairie. We're about to publish his guide to financing for communities. So we are definitely thinking about things like that. We're definitely thinking about tools that, things we can build for all of our communities, but also make public so that any community can access it. And And it's probably something that's going to have to be, at least if we're successful, it's going to have to be revised over and over again. But again, it's just making the connections and showing what information is out there is really helpful. So we'll definitely be publishing on our website and continue to do it. Things like that financing guide, because we're just now ramping up the actual technical work. Some of that stuff hasn't been done yet because we're just building it. But I just want to say we've gotten a lot of inquiries from businesses, like innovators, who are thinking about everything from software solutions on out. And I'm blown away by this idea that there could be a whole innovation ecosystem just focused on just technologies or applications for things that are designed for these communities. But I also think it's a little bit of a tricky space, right? Because a lot of those solutions, those vendor solutions, it's hard for us to be in the middle of them. So I have started to get together with our industry advisors and a commercialization team to say, what do we do about that? Like, is there a role for the labs in helping to think about technology solutions in the future? Again, back to this whole market, we want there to be more people who have knowledge and can bring this out to the communities. So it's not just hub and spoke through us. So I think there's a lot of ways in which we're trying to form partnerships and kind of bigger cohorts and bigger collaborations beyond this group.
Yeah, and I think in that you answered another question that came up that asked about how people get involved in, from the developer into the financing and what are the opportunities there. So, I would say check the Energy Storage for Social Equity website. And when the handbook comes out with Richard Baxter helping on that, that'll give some ideas in terms of what the needs are and some potential path forwards.
Yeah, and anyone who, sorry, just to make that really easy for Vince, we do have a website, an email address that's like es4sc@pnnl.gov. It's on the website. Feel free to use it. We do answer everybody, and sometimes we don't know the answer, but we try to get back with everybody because we care about a lot of people are interested in this solution. So there's that. And then Richard's report, among other things, we do have an energy equity newsletter that goes out, and there's, I think, on the website. Shannon or Laura can help me with that one, but exactly where, but you can subscribe so that you get these kinds of updates as they come out. So you don't have to kind of keep checking the website. Yeah. And
you see that Shannon has put the es4e@pnnl email address.
Okay.
That would be a good contact for anyone interested in being engaged here.
Yes.
All right. Well, I see we're running down towards the end of time. I did want to note that our OE program manager, Dr. Emerjuk, is on the line, and he did have a clarifying comment. So back to the question that was about, size of these systems, minimum size, that we would look for it. He did point out that, some of the work that's been done previously by our partners at Sandia, working with the Navajo Nation, they were looking at, as small as 3 kilowatt scale systems that were being deployed in there. So even at a pretty small scale, these can have an impact in there. It doesn't have to be megawatts or megawatt hours that we're deploying to have a positive impact in these applications.
Right. It's about the impact.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Rebecca, thank you very much. Thank you for all that joined us today. We appreciate your time, and hopefully you can join us in 2 weeks. If we can pull up the slide here. So on June 9th, Srinivas will be talking about buildings as storage assets in there. How do you effectively use those to augment kind of the storage capability? David Reed on June 23rd will be talking about the reliability test laboratory, where we are taking commercial or near commercial storage systems and putting them through a standardized grid use case and trying to get an accurate assessment of the performance of these different technologies. And then on July 14th, we will have a presentation by Saman and Diane talking about the energy storage system controls. So with that, I want to thank you all again for your time. Excuse me, and look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks. Thank you.